Hello to everyone tonight. Yuma in the Ngunnawal language of the traditional owners of Canberra. Dawaranuna, Dawaranunawal. This country here is Ngunnawal country, and one of the great things I always think about being Australian, but also being part of the STEM sector, is that we are invited to connect with such an incredible, an awe-inspiring span of science, technological, engineering and mathematical knowledge of the traditional owners of this continent. And when we understand that the songlines, the deep knowledge systems that carry sophisticated STEM knowledge across this country, which have been evolved over the course of thousands and thousands of years, that is the foundation story of Australia's scientific and technological knowledge. And that opportunity, that invitation that traditional owners extend to us all when they acknowledge country, when they welcome us to country, is such a privilege for all of us. I'm really pleased to have been asked to talk to you a little tonight about careers in a bunch of things that are close to my heart. And of course, I'm Misha Schubert, the CEO of Science and Technology Australia. Our mission as an organisation is to speak with and for the nation's science, tech, engineering and maths workforce. So thank you to those of you who've joined us tonight. Really always delighted to engage with our members in RACI as well, one of the oldest organisations in terms of STA's lifespan of 35 years, and to see the incredible work that each of you are doing as early career chemists across the country. So thank you for the work that you do each and every day to bring your deep science skill and capability into the service of workplaces and organisations and the country more broadly. We're really grateful to you. We exist at the federal level to help speak to policymakers about the terrific scientific work that's being done in our country and to forge deeper connections between scientists and parliamentarians and policymakers. And that work is incredibly important in a number of ways. So tonight, I've been asked to talk to you about a number of things that are kind of interrelated. One of them is around science communications. And for some of you who might be thinking about a broader career in psychoms and extending your skills and interests in that field, there may be some particular areas of interest in that. But also the sort of related work, if you like, of career progressions in things like science policy and science advocacy. So what I wanted to do is just speak a little bit by way of introductory remarks about each of those things, and then perhaps invite any questions or chat or interactivity in the chat if you'd like to make it a really interactive conversation. So in terms of science communication, I think this has become an ever more important foundational part of core STEM capabilities in our country. Being able to tell stories with impact and to move people, to explain complex technical detail to an audience that has no deep expertise in your area of specialised subject knowledge is such a powerful skill. I say this to you as someone who started my life as a journalist and who was a general journalist. So my working career began in newspaper journalism quite a while ago now. And the foundational skill set that you acquire in a newsroom or a journalism context is a fantastic set of translatable skills, because that ability to think about how to distill really clearly and simply for the widest possible audience information about a complex or highly specialised area of knowledge is something that I use every single day in my work and have right across my career in a number of different guises. So I would really encourage you as a first thought to spend time developing your skills as writers and as storytellers, and thinking about how you can take more of the complex work that you are doing and tell it to the widest audience. That's going to be really important, whether or not you choose to try and pursue a job or a career that is overtly branded psychoms on the tin, if you like. but it will also be important in any other guise that you step into next. So if you are thinking about an academic research career and taking the next steps into a more senior research career in a university or medical research institute, or any of the sort of architecture of our research system, those abilities from strong foundational psychom skills are going to be really important as universities are asked to ever more effectively tell the stories of what they do and the social value they're delivering back into industry partners and communities. It's hugely important for the very topical work right now that the government is thinking a lot about, and senior research and STEM leaders across the country are thinking about, around how do we drive more translation of research and innovations that are done in our public research system into applied use, whether that's in industry settings or in the public sector or in our communities and the social fabric of our broader Australian community at large. And so those skills of being able to tell those stories, to take innovations that are happening in your worlds, particularly in chemistry, and to explain the broader applicational possibilities for them, I think are going to be so important in a research career, but also in that outreach work. It goes to a university's impact and engagement metrics. It's also going to be really important to tell those stories, to go and find industry partners, to do really clever collaborative work between universities and industry partners. The same is true whether you end up pursuing a career, I think, in the private sector. Again, one of the core things that employers look for, and I know this myself as someone who is hiring people and thinking about the kinds of skills and capabilities that I need in my teams, is to have people who can really, who can see how to tell a good story and who can communicate really effectively with the wider world. So there's a whole raft of opportunities there in those traditional career paths, I think, to build psychoms in as a part of your absolutely compelling offering to employers, but also to think about some of the matters that, some of the types of specific dedicated psychoms roles that are increasingly being created in science organisations and in major employers, to explain those that sort of content of what organisations are doing. More broadly, there's also opportunities that I want to encourage you to think about that might be of interest to you in science policy and science advocacy. So a couple of specific thoughts on that to start us off tonight. One of those is that area of thinking about the architecture of science policy. How does our scientific workforce actually lend those deep skills and the analytic skill set that comes from a foundational high quality STEM education to the broader project of public policy making? And this may be something that appeals to you. For the last 3 years at the federal level in Australia, through the Office of the Chief Scientist, a program has run called the Science Policy Fellows, which essentially recruits STEM professionals to work in the federal public service. So for a contract time limited period, people are recruited through a competitive selection process that usually kicks off every year about March, April, if that's of interest to you. And then people are recruited onto fixed term contracts and deployed into federal public service departments. This is bringing more STEM qualified professionals into the general work of policymaking in our country, but it's also giving more STEM professionals a taste of a possible career in public service and policy making. And I think in both directions, that's going to be an enormously powerful vehicle for stronger STEM capability in policy making in the next couple of years. It may be that over time, state governments also look to set up similar schemes. And so I would also keep a really keen eye, if that is something that appeals to you, on some of those possibilities and opportunities. Kind of similarly connected to that whole area of work and advocacy and thinking deeply around policy settings for the country is the world of science advocacy. And organisations like the one that I have the great privilege to lead, Science and Technology Australia, the learned academies in sciences, applied sciences, technology and engineering, and many other organisations that represent universities, medical research institutes and others, are always looking for people who have a really terrific depth of discipline knowledge in things like chemistry and all the broad STEM disciplines, but who can also engage people, who've got those sort of EQ and people skills to be able to advocate on behalf of our communities and the capability we know we need to build for the country to face its next set of challenges. And to be able to articulate those goals to policymakers, to industry, to the wider community, and again, forge some of those connections between people who need to have relationships with each other and know about each other's work, to bring together the intellectual capital, the networks and the resources to advance opportunities for Australia. There's so many possibilities in each of those fields for careers, and I really want to encourage you to think broadly around your career as well as not necessarily a single linear trajectory, but perhaps a portfolio of experiences that build on and complement and broaden your skill set at each juncture. When I look back now on my career path, I've done a number of different things over the course of my working life, broadly in newspaper journalism and broadcast journalism, then into advocacy and engagement in Indigenous organisations across the country, and then more broadly in advocacy, government relations, parliamentary relations, and reaching deeply into the STEM sector's expertise to bring that expertise into the service of the nation at the federal level. And the common thread that runs through all of that is the ability to build wide and deep relationships of trust with other human beings, to be a prodigious networker and to build those coalitions of people of like mind who can do clever things together, and to put together those sort of broader communities of people working in the same vein towards the similar goal. But it's also the other common thread through all of those experiences is that commitment to prioritise the skills of storytelling, to interrogate people in the best of and most gentle of senses, to be able to ask people about their specialisations, their fields of expertise, and then tell that story movingly to a wide public audience. So when you're thinking about the next set of skills that you want to really consolidate and develop, taking those opportunities to engage in those specialist skill training opportunities that might come your way in your workplace, really important to do. I want to just quickly mention a couple of other opportunities to that end that you might want to keep an eye out for in coming years to keep building your own skill set and portfolio. One of the things that STA runs is Science Meets Parliament, which you have probably heard of. Every year we bring hundreds of scientists together in Canberra, typically, normally when we can gather in person, to have 2 days of networking and really high quality professional development, honing our elevator pitches, honing our writing skills and learning how to engage really effectively with parliamentarians and policymakers. And then we unleash you all on parliamentarians, so people get a chance to go and meet with MPs and senators and build those skills as advocates and explainers of the work that you're doing. We typically kind of go out through our member societies, including RACI, and about the sort of end of the year, heading into the new year, when we will planning to run Science Meets Parliament next February at this point. So keep an eye out for those opportunities. In sort of November, December, we'll start to advertise the opportunity to apply. For younger, early career of any age people, we also offer a number of scholarships so that you can come to that event fully funded. And so there's opportunities there. So keep an eye out for them. It's a terrific opportunity to build your professional networks even more deeply with people across so many disciplines of STEM, but also to really hone some of those skills. We also run the Superstars of STEM program. So every 2 years we recruit a diverse cohort of women across the sciences and the STEM disciplines to really try and help to shift that chronic challenge we have with the underrepresentation of women in the STEM disciplines, and to encourage and build a bigger cohort of communicators and public figures, people with a public profile who are women of diverse backgrounds. So that's another opportunity to keep an eye out for. And then thirdly, we run a program called the STEM Ambassadors. So around every December or so, we open a competitive selection process again for people who might want to be trained in how to engage with parliamentarians and offer themselves as a STEM ambassador for a 2-year period to be matched with a federal MP or senator. In addition to the really terrific high quality bespoke training that we give participants in that program, we also support you to find resources and connections and to really build that great relationship with your federal MP that you're matched with. So another terrific opportunity to add to the breadth of skills and the networks you've got, and also to access some further really high quality training. So keep an eye out for that as well, and apply if you think that's something that fits really neatly with your interests. I might just briefly pause there, other than to say that organisations like Science and Technology Australia love to involve people in our governance structures and in our thinking about the big ideas that we're going to need to focus the minds of policymakers on to grapple with the big challenges that are coming at us as a country and as a community. And also about some of the opportunities. When we think about some of the seismic changes that are going to happen or change our lifetimes, I think about so many frontiers of knowledge, and STEM disciplines are right at the very forefront of that. Everything from big environmental challenges and a changing climate through to the huge wave of emerging and frontier technologies that are coming at us with AI, machine learning and quantum. Big opportunities with chemistry skills at their core in so many areas of expertise. So I wanted to just paint that broad picture for you at the outset, invite perhaps a bit of interactivity in a conversation if there's anything you want to ask about or offer by way of comment. And I see Thirua has joined, so I'm really happy to throw that open now and see where the conversation might take us tonight. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Misha. So it's an amazing talk, and you emphasize not only on scientific careers, but how different nodes in a scientific process, like from research to policy-making decisions, and how those nodes are interconnected and intervened in the matrix of communication. And thank you so much. It's an inspiring talk, and your flawless talk is always a treat to watch.
Thank you.
Let's see whether there are questions.
Here we go. Here we go. Someone who's anonymous is asking about, thank you for saying thank you. As an early career researcher, I've always been under the assumption that you need to have had a successful career in order to go into policy making. Is this true or not necessarily? I don't think it is. I don't think it's a requirement. You should value how incredibly valuable your skill set is, and your deep knowledge of your discipline for a start is going to be in the policymaking context. One of the things that I think public service departments increasingly recruit for is a deep analytical skill set. And think about your education in science. This is exactly what a scientific education is about, that idea that you set out to test and analyze and to establish your working theory about things, and then to look for the holes in your own arguments and your own lines of evidence, to rigorously test, to subject yourself to peer review, and then to progress that field of knowledge, that frontier of knowledge. But the rigor embedded in the work of science, and particularly in the publishing and peer review context, is a really rigorous, deep process of testing and thinking about the implications of a piece of knowledge or the gaps in one's own thinking. So think about it in those terms, because when we think about it really clearly, about that sort of deep analytical and rigorous skill set, that is precisely the type of skill set that policymakers and government departments really want. Many of them do have graduate programs as well. So if you're a sort of pretty newly minted person, you might fall within the sort of eligibility criteria for graduate programs, if that's something of interest to you. But increasingly, departments are also doing general rounds of broad applications for people to go into public service roles. And so I would be really, I would make a virtue of the fact that you've got that sort of deep foundational knowledge in your subject area. At whatever stage of your career you're at, because that is just golden to employers in the public service. Thierry, shall I keep powering through these? Yeah, questions? Yeah. Anne-Marie, how important do you think data visualization is for science communication? Are there people that you know that specialise in visual data communication? I think it can be really important, but I want to add a really important caveat to this. I think sometimes we can feel like the sort of data and visualization, or, you know, I showed them a graph, why haven't they just changed the policy already, kind of, you know, evidence, because graphs and data can be so compelling to us, is to think that because we've seen the data, because we've seen the graph, of course this is the right way to proceed. But I always think that sometimes the best course of approach is to bring policymakers two things. One is hard data and the actual statistical or empirical evidence they're going to need to consider a policy shift or a new policy setting, but also telling them a story that moves people. So trying to find a way to emotionally connect a parliamentarian or a decision maker to what it is that you're asking them to change the policy settings as well. And I think if you can do both of those things in the same transaction, that is perfection in terms of the kinds of effective approaches I've seen to really shaping public policy settings most effectively. I think data visualization is an incredibly important field more generally for how we explain to wide public audiences the implications of things. And, you know, we've all seen it, haven't we? That moment where you actually see someone's graph or a way of plotting things visually and you think, aha, I get it. So in terms of the people who are really good at that, there's a number of organisations that are sort of popping up all over the place. Someone who I think is a really terrific storyteller and does a little bit of this, but also just tells really powerful stories, is a woman called Kylie Ahern, who was one of the founding editors of Cosmos magazine in Australia. And now runs an organisation called STEM Matters, which is a bespoke STEM storytelling consultancy and organisation. And she produces a publication called The Brilliant. So if you haven't come across this yet, look it up, Google it, and follow her work, because it's full of these terrific stories of incredible Australian talent and innovators and pioneers, but also some luminous talent from around the world, who are right at the cutting edge of knowledge. And the way she does that with such impact is incredibly important. Scientel are another organisation, one of our member benefits partners at STA, and they do quite a bit of that data visualisation and visual representations of people's findings. And I know that there are a number of government agencies that are starting to experiment more and more with that. How do you take published research findings and turn them out of inside the Beltway, very specialised discipline jargon and into powerful language that you can communicate to a wide public audience with. So there's probably a bunch of resources, and if there's further things, if I think of any further specific companies or organisations that are doing that, I'll flick it on via email through Theory. Another question, what do you think the different career progressions or opportunities for psychoms are? They're starting from science as opposed to starting from journalism. Yeah, there's a lot, and I think it's just sort of tackling it from the other direction, isn't it? And then kind of getting to the same kind of point where the road joins up. But essentially the bit that you've got right from the get-go is understanding the back end of the science. So understanding that foundational kind of knowledge and then being able to grow your confidence as a storyteller. So some of the things that we've also done in recent years to really help the science community to continue to build those skills are our Super STEM communicator workshops. If you're at an organisation or institution that does have a little bit of a professional development or training budget, come and talk to us about that, because we do a range of things. I run one to teach people how to write even more kind of clearly and crisply, and to get rid of some of the clutter in your writing, which I love to teach. But we also have other trainers and teachers in our organisation who teach everything from, how to really hone your pitch around the kinds of work that you're doing, that sort of foundational storytelling in speech form. So being able to stand up and just give that sort of most powerful connection and explanation of what you're doing. So I think absolutely, mastery of all the content knowledge when you're coming from a science degree pathway means that you've got, all the content with just a tiny bit of refinement to do around the sort of honing of your storytelling to the next level. We've got another question here, Theru, about, is there any opportunity for PhD graduates in the area, of psychoms? Is there a specific pathway to get into opportunities in psychoms? So not a bespoke pathway that's sort of dedicated just to PhD scholars, I think, but certainly there's a lot of those opportunities that I'd flagged before are absolutely open to people with PhD. So if those sort of opportunities in science communication or policy advocacy and policy development sound like they might be of interest to you, having a PhD is also a terrific door opener, I've got to say. The number of people who work in those policy advocate roles in Canberra who do have PhD level quals is quite high for a particular reason, because you've also demonstrated the marathon-like skills that you can actually do a sustained and concentrated piece of work across that long form experience, stick with detailed material across the sort of endurance sprint marathon of completing a PhD. And you've learned other things along the way, in terms of the research development you've contributed to. In many cases, you will have done industry engagement, particularly in chemistry, as part of your PhD. So packaging all of those things together in your case to an employer, I think, is a really important thing. And not assuming that they actually know much about what a PhD entails as well. So the other little tip I would give people is, don't assume that particularly a private sector industry employer or a public service potential employer really understands exactly all the types of skills that you've developed in the course of getting your PhD, and unpack that for them, explain what it means to really just sort of wrestle deeply with a topic across a 3-year time frame, or plus for some people. Life gets in the way sometimes, and people have the juggle of caring responsibilities and lots of other things going on. If you have had industry engagement as part of that PhD or your higher degree programs, absolutely, shine the spotlight on that, right? Because you're showing people that you can juggle multiple responsibilities at once. You can manage multiple stakeholders in an employment context, and you've got a little insight and a window on what private sector workplaces are like through that experience and the imperatives of a business employer. But also you've had a chance to really get a sense of some of the research ecosystem from the inside as in the course of doing a PhD. So explaining all of the actual nuts and bolts of what you've done in a PhD to an employer, I think, is a really, really powerful thing.
So I may read the next question, Misha.
Great.
So you have answered part of this question. And the question is like, thanks, Misha, a great talk. After 10 years of academia, would you recommend any further training to enter the world of science communication, or only support a job application by highlighting different types of communication we have been trained for, like conferences and presentations? I think you have answered that question just now.
Yeah.
And we'll move on to the next question, which is, what is the most challenging part of your role?
That's a really great question. What is the most challenging part of my role? Not being able to clone myself. So if the cloning sciences could get onto that, that'd be great. And not having enough hours in the day. So one of the most exciting parts about Science and Technology Australia is we have 92 member organisations across spanning everything from all of the traditional science disciplines right across through to really clever parts of the tech startup landscape. So lots of deep tech, so science and engineering enabled startup companies that have spun out of the public research system and out of private industry, people seizing the opportunity to start their own little company, Australian backed as well, and parts of the research sector and institutions, parts of the private industry sector, and to speak for something like 88,000 scientists, technologists, engineers and mathematicians across the country. The role that STA plays is to try and really bring together that huge community of interests and diversity. And the thing I often say to policymakers is that depth and the reach into so many clever people across this country who are doing such skilled, important work for the country is such an asset. So it's the amount of time in the day that I have and trying to do all the things that we would do if we could clone ourselves tomorrow, I guess, is the thing that that I find sort of the juggle mostly in the day, and wanting to do so much with and for this community. So yes, if we could invent time travelers or some other device a la Harry Potter to create more hours in the day, I think that would be an excellent innovation.
Thank you, Misha. It's a very good explanation. And talking about time, we are running out of time today for the 40-minute talk, and there's one more question at on the question panel. It's from Gabriella. How do you keep up to date on storytelling skills?
Yeah, yep. That's another really great question. Thanks, Gabriella, too. So one of the things I often say to people about writing is to become a better writer, become a better reader. So to actually go and watch what other people who are at the top of their craft do and to learn actively from them, to watch what they're doing and to notice their techniques and to think really deeply about what it is that they're doing that is so profoundly effective on you. So whether that's in written form, about sort of looking at going and finding sort of those compendiums of the best science writing each year, subscribe to Liam Mannix's weekly email examine that he runs from The Age's chief science writer, where he's doing really deft science journalism, where he's taking complex frontier science and he is explaining it really clearly to a very wide, non-specialized audience. Read things like that and watch to notice the techniques and the ways in which he's doing that in that context. And other science journalists across the country as well. In terms of those storytellers, I would make sure you're following things like ABC Science and Jonathan Webb and his fantastic team at the ABC, who do video and radio storytelling around science innovations, and also try and follow some of the superstars of STEM who we've trained to watch some of their great material. So if you're already on TikTok, you're probably already following Astro Kirsten across in the astrophysics world. She is a fantastic young Wiradjuri astrophysicist from UNSW. She's got just an extraordinary, a mind-popping number of followers on TikTok, and she does really terrific sci-coms, making these little short TikTok videos explaining parts of how the universe works, or some quirky thing about, you know, some random name for a star. And it strikes me that there's probably a million chemistry applications as well, where just explaining the everyday kind of insights around chemistry could have a huge life and legs of its own. So following those people on Twitter and through TikTok and other video and storytelling channels, I think is really powerfully, inspirational, because it shows you people who are really good at what they do. And a couple of the current superstars of STEM are doing a lot of media at the moment. So if you're not already following them, in terms of the really fantastic examples. Vanessa Perotta, who's one of our whale scientists in this current cohort of the superstars, does a lot of broadcast media, and she's got this, you'll see what I mean if you go and Google her and follow some of her video content, because she's got this lovely way of weaving in deep technical knowledge about ecological matters and whale species and migrations with a lovely line in whimsy. So she often talks about whale snot and how to capture it using little drones and other things. So there's a hook for a kind of a lighter touch angle through which she can then talk about the really serious work of species conservation, rebuilding marine mammal numbers, those sorts of things. But she uses that light touch hook to draw her audiences in.
Thank you, Misha. So I think we can end the discussion with this last question, which is like, I'll bind two questions into one. Like, there is a gap between policymakers and researchers, and also the question, like another question from Anonymous, is that some tips to get selected for different programs at STA, like Science Meet Parliament or the ambassador programs.
Yeah. Well, on the second one, put in a great application. So I would just say to everyone who might be interested in applying for those sorts of programs, ring people up and ask them. So ring up people who may have been before. You can, again, just Google people in your field who might have been a previous delegate to Science Meets Parliament. I'm sure RACI will give you sort of the names of people who might have been in previous years, and ring them up or email them and just ask them, how did you find the experience? Is there any insights you can share with me that would be helpful to strengthen my own application to apply to go this year? And as I say, keep an eye out for those scholarship opportunities as well, because they can be a terrific way to get someone else to pay for you to go, which is always, a terrific thing as well. But asking around, I think, is really important to just sort of understand how to make your best case. The other thing I would say about that sort of gap between science and policymakers, part of what we try to do is to really bridge that gap. And so having people who have an interest and a passion for trying to do that, I think, is so important. And indeed, people who can have fluid careers, who can move between the worlds of science and policy making, is part of how I think we can close those gaps and build more understanding and seize more opportunities for Australia as well. Being able to talk comprehensively and in great detail, technical detail, about what these opportunities might represent for Australia, with technical precision around specific discipline knowledge that you have, is such a powerful, potent skill mix, and the country needs you to have those skills and to do these things. So I would say more broadly, just keep an eye out for those opportunities. Follow Science and Technology Australia on Twitter and on our social media channels. Every time we open selection processes or applications for any of those big programs, we always advertise them there. So that's probably a really the most inbuilt powerful way of following those opportunities and keeping an eye out for when to apply. And don't be afraid to sort of, just follow, jump on the website from time to time, read your RACI newsletters and other channels and comms channels from those organisations as well. And go to events when we're able to do that again, when we're all out of lockdown again. And I know we will be, hopefully sooner rather than later. Those networking events where you get to go and meet people and build your professional networks, they can be so important to your own career development. I can't count the number of times when just those sort of personal networks that I've built across a lifetime and a career have then opened a door to a new opportunity for my organisation or for my networks, because when something's come across my desk or across my radar, I've been able to say, oh, I know the person whose hands to put this in to get this person connected over here to this other person who might be able to use that expertise or seize that opportunity or help that person open the next door. So building your own professional networks is another really powerful career development asset. And I also encourage you to spend time and effort doing that. and consolidating those networks, and, you know, hoover people up in your contact books and on your LinkedIn networks, so that you're actually seeing them in your feeds and those opportunities where you're making those connections and you're seeing what other people are working on, so that you can insert yourself into those opportunities too. Don't be afraid to be cheeky, and never be afraid to ask. That would be my final parting bit of advice.
Thank you so much, Misha, for your amazing talk and the discussion, and your knowledge that you shared with young early career researchers to build up their careers. And also, like, you can reach out to Misha in social networking platforms, and believe me, she will respond immediately. And that's how I managed to get her on board for RACI. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you, Misha, again, for your wonderful talk.
It's my very great pleasure. See, don't be afraid to ask.
Yes.
Excellent. Have a great night, everyone. All the best, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Stay safe.